do you have to collaborate with Texas or Missouri on abortion bounty hunting? Do you have to release information to them?
Well, let me just put it simply. I mean, they're going to have to take Attorney General Brown to court in order to get that from me.
Okay,
I mean,
good, good.
we're just not going to cooperate. And
Okay, Short Issues Podcast. We are here May 26th. We are here with a distinguished Congressman, Anthony Brown. How are you today, sir?
Brian, I'm doing just fine. Yes, indeed. Notwithstanding what's happening in the world around us and our country, these are troubling times, but I'm just grateful I was able to get out of bed this morning.
I appreciate the positivity in very troubling times, and we'll get into some of those troubles. Let's start off with the weather. Where are you in Maryland, and what are you experiencing over there?
Yeah, cloudy skies and seasonably cool. I think I would love to have had warmer weather in May, and we've got a lot of rain, but we know that summer's on the way, and when summer hits Maryland and the DC, the National Capital Region, it comes in like a lion, and then we're all wondering like, wow, where's that nice cool weather that we wish we had? But it's an overcast day, mild breeze, and I wish I could be outside. I'm behind my desk in my home office.
Yeah. Did you guys get any of that tornado last week or over the weekend? We were
Nope.
saved from it over here on the Eastern Shore. We didn't get like hail or, I mean,
No,
Cambridge
did
did a
get
little
that.
bit.
We did get hail in some of the communities around where I live, a lot of wind. So we didn't see any really down trees, but some branches were down, so not too bad where we are.
Okay, not bad. So let's start off, real introductory and remedial. But maybe there's some people listening who have only moved into Maryland recently and don't know your history or don't live in your district. Could you introduce yourself to a new potential voter? Who are you? What is your history? And what office are you running for?
Sure. Well, right now I'm a member of Congress, three-term member, finishing up my 6th year, Maryland's 4th congressional district. What does that mean? Parts of Prince George's County, parts of Anne Arundel County. I serve on the Armed Services Committee. I've spent 30 years in the military, active and reserve duty, with a tour of duty in Iraq. So my work on the Armed Services Committee is really rewarding, knowing that I'm doing as much as I can. Congress is fulfilling its responsibilities to support our warfighters. Before I was in Congress, I was Maryland's lieutenant governor for 8 years. I focused a lot on economic development issues, higher education issues, veterans issues, again, sort of tying back into my service in the military. Before that, I was 2 terms in the Maryland House of Delegates. I was the majority whip, had to corral the votes, get the votes to pass important legislation. I've passed the Maryland bar in 1994, so nearly 3 decades as an attorney. And I'm running for Attorney General. Brian Frosh, who currently serves as our Attorney General, he announced in October that he won't seek re-election. So I decided that I was going to run. 16 years ago, I had made the same decision, but then I was asked to join Martin O'Malley as his lieutenant governor. I'm glad I did. We had a great 8 years. But now I'm back to where I intended to be 16 years ago, and that's leading probably the largest public interest law firm in Maryland, the Office of the Attorney General. 450 lawyers, everything from environmental law to antitrust, consumer protection, criminal investigations and prosecutions. It's a diverse office, a lot of responsibility, and I think my leadership, both as lieutenant governor, executive leadership, legislative, that experience, as well as managing lawyers as an attorney, I think suits me well and will serve the people of Maryland well as their next Attorney General.
Okay, cool. Can you give me like a particular achievement that you're proud of? Let's say from recent history. Your term as a congressman. What's something that's like emblematic of your brand, a position that you really fight for?
Sure, and I fight for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I believe that whether it's the United States military or whether it's the Office of the Attorney General, it should reflect the diversity that is America, both by race, ethnicity, gender, orientation, identification. And I've worked a lot on those issues in Congress, greater diversity and equity, whether it's in promotions and assignments for service members of color or their treatment under the military justice system. We know that in the military, a young African American airman is 2.5 times more likely to be investigated, prosecuted, and convicted of similar offense than a white service member. So I've worked on those issues. But the one achievement that my team and I were able to accomplish, and believe me, this is not the only thing, but it really represents, I think, it's the culmination of much of our work. My office, working with Senator Warren on the Senate side, we are responsible for what you're going to see happen this year, which is a major development in the DoD, and that is we're going to rename 10 Army installations that are currently named after Confederate traitors. Think Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, Fort Hood, AP Hill in Virginia. I learned to fly helicopters at Fort Rucker in Alabama. I've been to I think I may have mentioned Fort Hood. 10 military installations. We're gonna strip those names off those installations, and we're going to instead recognize and pay tribute to more patriotic Americans who have served in uniform. And it's not just those installations, it's going to apply to all buildings, all real estate, all facilities. And, and some people want to say, well, what's the big deal of that? It's just a name. Well, the names, speak volumes. When you're going through the gate at Fort Bragg, which is one of the largest power projection platforms in the United States military, it's home to the 82nd Airborne and Division and the 18th Airborne Corps. When you go through that in the future, and it's named, it's going to be called, if the Secretary of the Army accepts it, it's going to be Fort Liberty. I said, yeah, okay, good. That's what these men and women are about, defending our freedoms and our protections and democracy and liberties for everyone. And that's certainly going to be a lot more inviting and appealing, and send a much stronger signal, not only to the service members going through the gates, but to America, why our military does what it does and the values that it protects. So I'm proud of that. My team did it. We worked with Senator Warren, and we're going to see those names change over the course of this year.
Okay, cool. I strongly endorse that position. But I want to ask a question that a contrarian would ask, a person
Sure.
that thinks that changing the name of a fort is history erasure. What do you say to that person?
There are plenty of museums that will continue to provide education and information about members of the Confederate Army, whether they were generals or privates. There will be an appropriate place to remember history, to acknowledge history. But when you name a military installation, you're celebrating history, and we should not be celebrating members of the Confederacy who are essentially traitors. Interesting point, although I think it's less significant than the point I just made, but interestingly enough, most of these generals, Bragg, Benning, Hood, Rucker, they weren't even accomplished Confederate generals. Most of them were really pitiful performers on the battlefield. And they really received the recognition, the tribute, because they championed the lost cause after the end of the Civil War and trying to perpetuate hatred and division and racism. So they stood for the lost cause. And that's why their names adorn those military installations. And so we're going to strip those names, and we're going to, we won't forget who they are, who they were and what they did. No one will ever forget the Civil War, and nor should we forget the participants on both sides. But there are ways that we can do it that's more appropriate and less celebratory.
Okay, good response. Yeah, so should we get into the troubles? Yeah, I had Katie Kern O'Malley on before, and that was a couple days after the Alito Justice League, and I thought that, oh my God, this is like the worst thing that's going to be happening for a while. And then the Uvalde shooting happens, I guess, 2 days ago.
And
We'll
let
just
us not forget Buffalo as well.
Oh, Buffalo. Yes, Buffalo. I really shouldn't underplay that. Yeah, yeah. So first, what are your reactions to I think it's 19 is the kill count now of this shooter in Texas. Like, what's your reaction to that?
Enough is enough. I mean, we've just seen far too many shootings in elementary schools and high schools, mosques, synagogues, and churches. We've seen them in retail stores and theaters and discotheques, or nightclubs, I should say. And when is this country going to really acknowledge that unlike any other country in the world, the access to guns that Americans have contributed to widespread mass shootings that you do not see in other countries. We are stripping from families and communities children. We are stripping people because of their race and their identity. We are taking far too many lives. And I know a lot of people will say guns don't kill. It's the people that have the guns. But my response is then don't give them access to guns. And there's no one single thing that will reduce, or I should say eliminate gun violence in this country. But there are many things that we can do that will reduce the chances, the likelihood, the probability of murder by gun. And I support on Capitol Hill. First of all, I support the total ban on assault weapons. We did that in Maryland, and I know it's being challenged in the courts. But I've also introduced a bipartisan bill on Capitol Hill. If we can't ban all assault weapons, at least raise the age to the same age you would be required to buy a handgun in this country. Under federal law, if you're going to buy a handgun from a registered dealer, you've got to be 21 years of age. However, for the semi-automatic, for the assault weapon, you only have to be 18. And look what happened. The murderer in Buffalo and the murderer in Uvalde both purchased those assault weapons under the age of 21. I think we could have prevented those two massacres that just recently happened. But there are other things that we need to do as well that I'm more than happy to go into if you'd like. I mean, things like red flag laws and things like that.
Yeah. As sort of a general trouble that I see coming into the near future for an AG of any progressive state is how to deal with the repeal of all these civil liberties, as well as, possibly these attacks on saying that assault weapon bans are unconstitutional in state governments, or that you don't need to be part of a well-regulated militia in order to have a firearm, making discriminatory laws like that. They're saying that making discriminatory laws like that in Maryland are bad. I really wonder, like, what can an AG do against this extremist Supreme Court,
Well, certainly we have to put our best foot forward and make the strongest arguments that we can. And, the Supreme Court, as well as, federal appeals court, appellate court judges, district court judges, they're nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and then, live out the rest of their life if they choose on the bench, not accountable to the people. And I'm not suggesting that, judges are reckless and indiscriminate and or anything like that. But, when you get bad outcomes, you really can't hold these judges accountable once they're on the bench. But what you can do is make the strongest arguments. And there are the Bill of Rights includes 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, and at least the first 8 of them apply to sort of like individual liberties and protections and rights and procedures. And most, if not all of them, have limitations, right? We know there are limitations on the First Amendment. You can't, I know this is classic, but it's a good example. You can't stand up in the middle of a movie theater and scream fire, right? You can't, and then claim that's my First Amendment right to expression or freedom of speech. There are restrictions, and the First Amendment it's number one, right? It's first in line, and it's so important. Yet we do recognize restrictions. And I think the same has to be done for the Second Amendment. The founding fathers could not have contemplated that residents of this country, citizens of this country, would be able to take up arms and indiscriminately take the lives of innocent men, women, and children. Right? The Second Amendment was adopted at a time when the British would occupy people's homes. You had you were coming out of a monarchy that would use the military to suppress the citizenry. And this was an opportunity to say, listen, you have a right to bear arms. And in the backdrop of that, was the government that we were coming out of and moving away from in England. We live in a democracy today where the protections afforded to citizens, the checks and balances within government, between the branches, the checks on the military. I just think the threat that was what was present back in the late 1700s just doesn't exist today. But sure, it's still an amendment. It's in law. And I think that reasonable restrictions that are consistent with the evolution of our society, of who we are as a people, are important, appropriate, relevant, and those arguments need to be made and made strongly in the courts of law.
Yeah. So if and when the Supreme Court rules it unconstitutional to have assault weapons bans, for example, like what could we do in Maryland to counteract against such a thing happening if and when it does happen?
Well, look, right now we do have a ban on assault weapons, and as we mentioned, it's being challenged in the courts. If the Supreme Court rules that bans on assault weapon are unconstitutional, they are inconsistent with the Second Amendment, then it's probably less what we can do in Maryland. We certainly, although let me back up, we certainly can continue to require the registration, the universal background checks, which are supported by 86% of Americans. We have included fingerprinting in our background checks, which allow law enforcement to do a lot of cross-check and data analysis to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't have them, and we can strengthen that. Certainly, we should strengthen our red flag laws. We have a red flag law. It allows parents and police to petition courts to put someone on essentially a no-buy list. New York has extended that to educators and school personnel. There is still cracks in their law, as we saw, and we're analyzing from Buffalo. But strengthen, broaden our red flag law. Make sure that the procedures and protocols are in place so that when a petition is filed, the name actually makes it to the list and that it's in the database. So it would be unfortunate if the Supreme Court were to overturn our assault weapons ban, but we would still have to make sure that the safeguards are in place so that whomever now is eligible or seeks to purchase is not a threat to themselves or to others. Universal background checks, red flag laws, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, before we leave the guns, Maryland Maryland medical cannabis users are discriminated against a little bit when it comes to purchasing shotguns and rifles. They apparently you're not supposed to be able to have a MMCC card and be a firearm owner at the same time. However, when you purchase a firearm, the legal system and the system that the background checks don't intersect. So like a lot of cannabis card havers can purchase firearms, but it doesn't go to the prosecutorial apparatus of the state. I was wondering, do you think that this law is just, or do you think it's discriminatory towards medical marijuana people as being unreliable gun users?
Yeah, I don't know if I would use the term discriminatory. What I will acknowledge is that as we are transitioning, we started with the decriminalization of marijuana, which I supported. I think it's now been maybe 10 years in Maryland. I thought that a disproportionate percentage of those who are being arrested and indicted and prosecuted and convicted for simple possession were young Black and brown men. And we know what that means for their future, harder to get a job, harder to get housing and things like that. So I supported the decriminalization, supported the medical marijuana, because I do believe that there are certainly, therapeutic, medicinal, medical reasons why the use of cannabis is, helps relieve certain conditions and pains and things like that. I think Israel, for example, has done an extraordinary job at exploring the different applications of cannabis to address different medical conditions. I think the United States is far behind in that, but I supported that. Now, as we go to adult lawful use, so arguably the universe of users will exponentially expand. There are a number of inconsistencies in the law that have to be addressed. So you mentioned one, having, and now at lawful use, it's not, you're not even going to have a medical cannabis card. You're going to, anyone over the age of 21 will be able to, just like alcohol, consume. But here are the challenges it creates. You point out one in terms of gun ownership or purchase and ownership. You have another one. Think about commercial drivers, right? To get a commercial driver's license, CDL, right? You've got to have regular drug testing. And if you're on medical marijuana or lawful use, if that becomes the law in Maryland, and you go through a drug test a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after your last consumption of cannabis, you're going to test positive, and that's going to disqualify you from being a commercial driver. So we've got to work our way through that, because part of it is going to be education. You're going to have to educate people that, look, under the current law, if you choose to consume, these are some of the barriers and restrictions you're going to counter. Some of the issues are really medical. Can we come up with an assay, a test, where we can more accurately determine whether the presence of THC in your body is it actually impairing you? And if not, and we treat it like alcohol, then where you're under a certain BCT, then you should be good to go. So there are a lot of things that have to be worked out. I don't know if I would necessarily say that it's a discriminatory law. It does have an impact on a certain category of people, and we just got to sort through this if we're going to continue our march towards a broader, wider acceptance of cannabis consumption in our community.
Okay, so you're willing to be persuaded if there's good data suggesting that marijuana users aren't extra violent or irresponsible gun owners, for example?
I don't accept the fact that cannabis users are any more violent than anyone else, and I don't accept that. I think that that we, part of the legislation that has been passed is to continue studying the effects of cannabis. Now, the focus is a lot on pregnant women and young children continuing to develop. But this is the data that we need to understand to make sure that those who are seeking a license for a gun, to purchase a gun, if they're a user of whether it's medical marijuana or adult lawful use, we've got enough data where we can determine whether or not that's an appropriate, reasonable license to issue or not.
Right.
So yes, I'm open to it.
Okay. Yeah, good. Let's move on to another really harrowing thing. The Alito memo leak, the 98 pages, seems like the eventual overturn of Roe v. Wade, kind of similar to the discussion about the assault weapons possible repeal. What can you do as a Maryland AG to further fortify women's rights to abortion access, and to shelter out-of-state abortion seekers from the prosecutorial apparatus of Texas or Missouri, Louisiana, for example, that have bounty hunter laws for abortion people? What can you
Let
do
me start by saying that, a Supreme Court decision, and I know we're all anticipating probably a narrow 5-4 vote that would overturn Roe versus Wade. This would be the first time in the history of our country where a right or a protection extended to any group of Americans has now been curtailed. The seminal landmark Supreme Court decisions around individual protections and liberties and rights and privacies have always been to expand them. Sometimes taking far too long in the course of our nation's history, but never to eliminate. So this would be unprecedented, I believe, cruel, unusual, and entirely unacceptable. For 50 years, women have relied on this holding, this ruling that has enabled them to make that choice for themselves in consultation with whomever they want, whether it's their faith, their family, or their physician. So this would be a dramatic rollback that I think would do tremendous harm, will do tremendous harm to women, and quite frankly, even more so for low-income women who may be in Texas or Louisiana or Mississippi and have no opportunity, no resources to go to a state like Maryland, come to a state like Maryland, where abortion services will continue to be available. So why do I say that? In 1992, Maryland legislature, it's unbelievable that it took 19 years after the Supreme Court decision, but in 1992, we codified, we put into statute the protections of Roe versus Wade. I support Speaker Jones's effort this year. It was unsuccessful to enshrine Roe versus Wade into Maryland's constitution to send a very strong signal, okay, and to also prevent any efforts in the Maryland legislature by Republicans to try to undermine the protections afforded by Roe v. Wade as codified in Maryland statute. So I'd like to see it in our Constitution. And as Attorney General, I will continue. I was in Annapolis this year. I will continue to advocate for that. But what we did this year in the Maryland General Assembly, I applaud the Maryland legislature. We put more resources into abortion services in clinics and centers around the state where we were already seeing a lack of those services. And now that we anticipate more people coming to Maryland, we not only have to be able to continue to serve Marylanders who seek these services, including things like contraceptive services, but we have to support women who will choose to come to Maryland, and we want to welcome them. That's the kind of state that Maryland is. We also expanded the category of health providers who can perform abortion services to include, trained, competent, qualified nurse midwives. And I think that's very important. We've also now said that regardless of insurance, there may be an exception or two that abortion services will be made available and covered by insurance. And where Medicaid does not provide, then there will be separate state funding particularly for low-income women. So Maryland is in a good place. But we shouldn't be satisfied and content with that, because 50 years ago, we thought America was in a good place when we passed Roe versus Wade. And look what we're fighting against today. So we have to continue to be vigilant in Maryland to make sure we are protecting the choice, the rights, the liberty of women and their reproductive freedoms.
Right. So the last I heard about Hogan is holding up dispersing the funds. Like him and Brian Francho and Peter Francho are he's not dispersing the funds to start the training programs. Is that correct? The last time I heard.
Currently Governor Hogan is refusing to release $3.5 million for the abortion care clinical training program. And this is important because we're training now, as I said earlier, a broader group of providers to perform these services. And what is really troubling about Governor Hogan is he campaigned 8 years ago saying, hey, the question about abortion is settled in Maryland. I will follow the law. Well, the legislature just passed a law creating the abortion care clinical training program. That's the law in Maryland. They passed the appropriations bill, which has the significance of the law, and he's refusing to spend the money. So he's not upholding, he's not implementing the law or the will of the people as reflected by the General Assembly and the votes that they took. So I saw this coming 8 years ago. I was not successful in convincing Marylanders that, when it comes to women's reproductive rights, Governor Hogan is not on your side. He's not on our side. And now we're seeing it in full display as he refuses to disperse that $3.5 million.
Yeah, I also noticed that Kelly Schultz has dropped her anti-abortion stances from her previous anti-abortion stances from her campaign as well. Did you see that?
I saw that, and
Yeah.
let's hope that Maryland voters are not fooled for a second time. Kelly Schultz has been very clear on her, anti-choice, position. And you can't just get on a campaign trail and change your stance, change your language, change your position. And I think Maryland voters are smarter than that. And again, I think that both Democrat, Republican, and independents support a woman's right to choose, to have access to the full range of reproductive health services, including abortion services. And in November, certainly leading up to November, I'm going to do everything I can to point that out and to remind Marylanders who the true Kelly Shultz is on this issue.
Okay, good. Getting back a little bit to the second component. I sent this to Christian originally, but Connecticut passed a House Bill 5414. It's kind of like ours, so women have the right to abortion enshrined in their state constitution. But it's also kind of a counter bill to Texas SB 8, the abortion bounty hunting. It's basically saying that Connecticut will not collaborate with any prosecutorial people for laws that exist only in their state, such as the vigilante abortion hunters. And I don't know if are you privy to this, and do you think we could have something like this in Maryland?
Certainly, I support that. I think we should be taking any and every position we can to ensure that we are protecting a woman's right to choose, whether that woman comes to Maryland from Texas or whether the woman is a Marylander. And we should use every legal avenue to protect that woman. So to counter the vigilante provisions of the Texas law, we should do that. And part of that, I think, is what we're doing in the digital space. And what do I mean by that? You think about your health app on your phone, your phone or your smartphone, right? Or those Fitbit watches. That collects a lot of data about people. And when it comes to women, it can collect data about what's, with all people, what's happening in your body, your menstrual cycle and things like that, and disruptions to that. And we've got to make sure that those apps are not providing that information to law enforcement in Texas, who's going to try to use that in prosecuting a case against you when you return to Texas. So we've got to, things like that, health and fitness apps. Also, the location tracking apps. We've got to make sure that those are not going to be used and made available in Maryland in such a way that data is provided to law enforcement in any state that wants to prosecute a woman for coming to Maryland. And on these location apps, you can see that, a person came, they went to this address. That address is the address of an abortion service clinic. And they're going to use that as evidence against a woman in that court back in Texas or Mississippi or Louisiana or wherever, Oklahoma. So as Attorney General, I will work with the legislature to make sure that we are passing laws to erect those barriers to Texas law enforcement, to erect those protections for women in Maryland, whether they're Marylanders or anywhere else, so that they can, in fact, exercise that right and make that choice regarding their reproductive freedoms.
Okay, so in case that we don't get to pass that, for example, and you do become AG, do you have to collaborate with Texas or Missouri on abortion bounty hunting? Do you have to release information to them, if that's the case, if we don't get a law like that?
Well, let me just put it simply. I mean, they're going to have to take Attorney General Brown to court in order to get that from me.
Okay.
I mean,
Good.
we're just not going to cooperate. And if they can make legal arguments under a federal law about, whether it's, reciprocity or comedy or any other legal theory that I have a duty to share data or to make available to them information, they're going to have to prove that in a court of law. I know that, for example, I'll just use an analogous example. When you think about extradition, right? Let's say Maryland has in custody someone who is, committed a crime in Texas. There are usually these multi-state compacts on regarding extradition, right? Just like we have them between the United States and other nations. And so, we're going to look at every legal authority we have not to cooperate and put the burden on Texas to prove us wrong.
Yeah, yeah. So I've interviewed Katie Kern O'Malley, and I'm a progressive. You're a progressive. Katie Kern O'Malley's a progressive, and you both have ties to Martin O'Malley. So as a voter, how do I parse the difference between the two of you? Could you compare and contrast your positions to Katie Kern O'Malley?
Yeah, we had a forum last night that was hosted by the League of Women Voters, University of Baltimore Law, a number of others, some media outlets. I looked at sort of like the coverage of it today, and I think it was fairly accurate. I think where we probably differ the most is in the experiences that we bring to the job. But those experiences play out, differently. I've spent 22 years in public service, right? I've been in the state legislature, I've been in Congress, I've been lieutenant governor. In the military, I've managed, 80 lawyers and paralegals in carrying out legal responsibilities and duties to service members and their families on consumer protection, on, criminal defense, administrative law. I've got large law firm experience and small law firm experience, and through all of that experience, I know that Marylanders deserve an attorney general who's going to be an agent for change and reform, and that's what's characterized my public service, right? I mean, I've fought to change the law, to improve the law, to expand protections and rights, and that's true whether we're talking about taking guns out of the hands of domestic abusers or banning assault weapons. That's true whether it comes to repealing the death penalty or to making the courts more accessible for those who have been injured in personal injury cases. That's been my experience as a member of the House of Delegates and a member of Congress, responsible to constituents, to serve them, to meet their needs and to meet them where they are. That's been my experience, and that differs from the experience of a judge. And I don't diminish the experience of a judge. That work is important, but 20 years on a district court is not the kind of experience alone that makes for an effective attorney general. The attorney general has to go to Annapolis to fight for greater authorities, right? Has to go to Annapolis to fight for a budget, not only the attorney general's budget, but look at what Brian Frost did this year. He was in Annapolis fighting for a larger budget for the Department of the Environment so they can conduct more inspections, environmental inspections, and take more enforcement actions. In order to do that, you have to have the kind of broad legislative and executive experience that I bring. And I think, as a district court judge where you're primarily presiding over, and it's important work. I don't discount that. It's important for the people that appear in district court. It's small claims court. It's our traffic court. It's misdemeanor type cases. It's not a court where assistant attorney generals often find themselves. The assistant attorney generals that go to court, they're in circuit court, the felony court, drug trafficking, multi-jurisdictional offenses, police accountability issues. They're in court for environmental crimes unit. That's circuit court, not district court. So I would say that my experience is broader and more relevant to the work of the attorney general. And I think that's where we differ. On the issues themselves, I don't think you're going to find a lot of daylight. We're both committed to addressing climate change and environmental enforcement. We're both committed to consumer protections, whether that's taking on businesses that are engaged in fraudulent and deceptive trade practices, or protecting our seniors against scams and et cetera. But where we differ is on that experience. And when you listen to voters around the state and what they're looking for in attorney general, how do we change the law to make the streets of Maryland safer, right? How do we change the laws to protect our environment? How do we change the laws to make sure that the blueprint for Maryland's future is implemented equitably? It's all about change, reform, and improvement, not just enforcement, but that's important. And I think that's where we differ. I really do. That's where our experiences differ. It's kind of like, you know, again, it's the largest law firm in Maryland, right? It's the largest public interest law firm in Maryland, 450 lawyers with a broad set of responsibilities. And there's no candidate running for attorney general that has that breadth of experience, both in the practice of law and in public service as I do.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, but before we go, could you just shout out where people can your website, where people can find more about you, your social media, so on and so forth, please?
Absolutely. So you can go to anthonybrown.com and you can find you know, me and you know the positions that we've articulated on you know, look, and I'm a member of Congress and my position on issues, not as a candidate for attorney general, but in terms of if you want to look at record, background, and experience, and I think it's important that you do. Not every candidate has a record. All of us make promises, but certainly, look, I invite people to go to my official website to see what my actual record of accomplishments are, what my priorities are. And just because I want to keep things separate, I'm not going to necessarily say what the URL is for my official website. I don't want someone saying that I'm using that to promote my candidacy, but you know, I've got a record, and you can find that official record on my official website. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter at you know, Brown 4, the number 4 MD on Twitter. We're on Facebook. I think it's Anthony G. Brown on Facebook. And very active, trying to push out information where we are on issues and positions, what's happening, you know, in Maryland and our reactions to it. So we're active on social media. Please, you know, check us out.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time, Congressman.
Hey, Brian, thank you. Take care. Stay safe.
All right.